Origin of the Bantu. The Bantu-speaking peoples are part of the Niger-Congo language family, which has deep roots in West Africa. Genetic and linguistic studies suggest that the Proto-Bantu people originated around modern-day Cameroon and Nigeria, about 4,000 to 5,000 years ago. From there, they migrated south and east in what is known as the Bantu expansion, starting around 3000 BCE. Indigenous status in West and Central Africa. West Africa. The ancestral Bantu peoples were native to West Africa, particularly around the Cameroon-Nigeria border. They shared ancestry with other indigenous Niger-Congo speakers, such as the Yoruba, Igbo, and Manda peoples. The Bantu became indigenous to Central Africa after settling there thousands of years ago. They mixed with Pygmy, Mbenga, Mbuti, Aka, hunter-gatherers, who were the original inhabitants of Central Africa. Over time, Bantu farmers absorbed and displaced many of these groups. The Bantu expansion, how they spread. The Bantu people moved southward and eastward, reaching the Great Lakes region, East Africa, and eventually Southern Africa. This migration was driven by agriculture, ironworking, and population growth, allowing them to dominate many regions. Are Bantu people indigenous to East and Southern Africa? No, the Bantu were not originally indigenous to East and Southern Africa. Before their arrival, these regions were inhabited by Nilotic, Cushitic, and Khoisan peoples, e.g. the San and Hadza in the south. However, after living in these regions for thousands of years, many Bantu groups are now considered indigenous to their respective lands. Conclusion. The Bantu are originally indigenous to West Africa, Cameroon, Nigeria region. They later became indigenous to Central Africa as they settled there thousands of years ago. Their expansion made them dominant across much of sub-Saharan Africa, but in East and Southern Africa they were not the first inhabitants. They arrived later and mixed with earlier populations.
Kunama versus Bantu. Who came first? The Kunama, Nilo-Saharan, likely predate the Bantu migration. The Kunama are considered one of the oldest indigenous groups of Eritrea and the Horn of Africa. Nilo-Saharan languages are much older than the Bantu language family. Archaeological evidence suggests that Nilotic and Cushitic-speaking populations were in East Africa long before the Bantu migration. The Bantu migration happened much later. Bantu-speaking peoples originated in West Africa, around Cameroon, Nigeria, and began expanding around 3000–2000 BCE. They spread across Central, East, and Southern Africa, mixing with indigenous groups along the way. Before the Bantu migration, East Africa, where the Kunama live, was already inhabited by Nilotic, Cushitic, and other ancient African groups. Genetic evidence. Who has older lineages? The Kunama have older genetic markers, AM13, E1B1B, linked to early East African populations. The Bantu carry E1B1A, which originated in West Africa and spread much later. This suggests that Kunama-related groups were already in East Africa before the Bantu expansion began. Conclusion. The Kunama, Nilo-Saharan, were in Africa before the Bantu migration, but neither group was among Africa's absolute first people. The Khoisan and Pygmies have the deepest genetic roots in Africa. However, if comparing just Kunama versus Bantu, the Kunama's ancestors were in East Africa much earlier than the Bantu.